I think it's a sign of excessive foreign influence.
We have to take defence and national security as our first duty and first priority.
An enemy state, and let's be clear, it's not just an economic competitor, it is a state that wishes our values in the West harm.
While we're here at the Guildhall for the Thatcher dinner, I obviously asked a burning question to a number of senior politicians about the ongoing row about Chinese spying. Nothing sums up, I think, to me, more the state of Britain than the allegations that a government collapsed a spying trial over the sake of protecting economic necessity with China. What's your response to that?
I think to be in a position where you are having to bend down to a state that is so obviously acting in its own interests and against yours, because we are held as economic hostage, I think is it's embarrassing for us as a nation.
Governments have fallen over pieces of birthday cake before. This makes, previous scandals, if proven, look piffling. This is serious stuff.
It's really substantial. It's very serious, and it remains the case as well, which is perhaps, if not the most serious thing, certainly a very serious part of it, that it seems very plausible that very senior sources in government have been actively dishonest about it, have lied about it.
Is this the reality of the world we live in, though, that actually, we don't have any growth, our economy is in the doldrums, and actually, blowing up GDP for the sake of upsetting the Chinese would bankrupt the country?
A weak economy is the reality of the world that we live in, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be this way.
Can you imagine her having much truck, final question, much truck with potentially collapsing a spy trial to avoid upsetting the Chinese? Can you believe that?
I think it's I think it's a sign of excessive foreign influence, it seems, on the government. But I give you one idea. If the Nobel Committee next year is casting around in its embarrassment to find the right candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize, the obvious answer is a posthumous award to Margaret Thatcher.
A very careful calibration between what's in our national interest, what are our security interests, and our economic interests. And you don't do that and build trust if you're not willing to be open about it.
The situation with China, that it appears that the Labour government has sacrificed justice, or pursuit of justice, over protecting economic ties with China. Former Defence Secretary, can I get your response to that?
Well, look, people have long argued about guns versus butter, and I've always argued that without guns you don't have butter. If you neglect your national security, everything else, from your trade and commerce through to the integrity of the NHS and it being able to manage your data, it won't function. So we have to take defence and national security as our first duty and first priority. The good lady herself knew that and did that. And what that means is that, yes, we have to have relationships with all kinds of nations, and we want to trade with them, and we want good things to happen from those relationships. But we have to be wide-eyed about what else they might be doing.
It feels like we're not being very wide-eyed, though.
Well, I have to say, we will see what transpires this week over that particular issue. But for me, it calls into question previous discussions that have gone on. The Chagos Island deal, people focus on the amount of money that's costing the country. What's often forgotten is that it severely hampers our ability to defend ourselves. We can't put maritime sensors where we want. We've got to tell Mauritius every time we want to do something. It is severely cramping our ability to do what we need to do on the defence front. So we'll see where this goes this week. I'm not in Parliament, alas, to ask these questions. But I think if it turns out that there's been an agenda going on that Parliament hasn't been cited on, we should review those arrangements and those deals that have been done.
Now, our next guest is a man who knew Margaret Thatcher personally and maintained a close personal bond with her in the later years of her life. He's currently the chairman of the Margaret Thatcher Centre. In the studio with us now, Conor Burns, former Tory MP, former minister, former close personal friend of Margaret Thatcher. Conor, last night we were joined by Sir Mark Thatcher in an astonishing interview. Do you think he captured there, what Margaret Thatcher was really like and what she'd think of what's going on in Britain today?
In many ways. Look, Mark knew Margaret Thatcher better than almost anyone else, perhaps, other than Dennis Thatcher. He grew up not just listening to the public utterances, but hearing the private person behind the philosophy. And I think he reminded us all what it was she believed and why it resonated so much with the British people and indeed around the world during her time in office.
He focused there on a lot of this idea that there's a missing ingredient in politics at the moment, which is conviction. And I thought it was fascinating that he sort of compared his mother almost to Donald Trump in America, who, love him or hate him, disagree with him or otherwise, you can't dispute, and all the polls show the American public do not dispute that he's getting things done and he has a driving force and mission. Why do you think that's so lacking in Britain now? And as of someone who's seen British politics up close from almost every angle in the last few years.
So I think if you go back to the way Mrs. Thatcher approached her politics, she used to say, politics at its purest is philosophy in action. She believed that there were two sets of people who went into politics. There were those who went into politics to be someone and those who went in to do something. And I think when we review the last number of years, particularly, honestly, candidly, the last 14 years of Conservative government, we frankly left many more problems than we solved over that period. And I think that started out because too many people in the Conservative Party sought to be the heir to Blair,
rather
when
than
actually
the heir to
they had the heir. And Britain now, I think, needs someone of the character, the stamina, the will, the vision of Margaret Thatcher to come in and tackle these enormous problems that we have.
Do you see anyone in the current crop of politicians that has that? Kemi Badenoch obviously has said that she wants to take that Thatcher flame and onwards. Do you think she's got the star quality that Sir Mark Thatcher says is required to do it?
Well, it was very interesting what Mark said about Kemi Badenoch. One thing that Kemi and Margaret Thatcher had in common is they're both scientists in some way. Kemi's an engineer, Margaret was a chemist. And they approach the thinking about problems based on facts. They're not that much interested in sound bites. And Kemi's had a lot of criticism about the time she's taking to evolve policy. But I think she understands how disillusioned the public are with politicians who rock up and present very easy solutions to incredibly complicated problems. She is taking the time to thematically work through the challenges and come up with things that will work. I don't remember it, but I read it, that in 1977, one of the national broadsheets ran an editorial saying that Margaret Thatcher had all the charisma of a privet hedge, and in the interests of victory at the next election, she should be replaced by Ted Heath. So I'm prepared to give Kemi... It wasn't actually. I'm prepared to give Kemi some space here to do this. I don't think Britain needs star quality. I think it needs people with a determination to really tackle head-on the really difficult challenges. By the way, I can say this now. I'm not in politics. I'm not in politics anymore. There is a dance of lying going on in Britain today, and it's been going on for a while. The politicians are lying to the public, and the public are lying to the politicians. We are in this age where
the
public are demanding more and more services from the state, but yet want higher taxes, they say, to pay for that, except the taxes that they themselves would have to pay. I saw this week after week in my own constituency in House meetings. Let's have more of that. Who's going to pay for it? Well, let's put more on the rich, let's put more on this, put more on business. We've got to get back to a question of what is it we want the state in our country to do? What is rightly the preserve of the state and what should be left to the individual? I think that's a whole-scale rethink of our social contract in the UK. And the figures you were going through with Sir Mark Thatcher around the levels of borrowing, the growing levels of debt, this is coming to a once-in-a-generation head, I believe. And it will require complete honesty and candour from the public and the politicians.
So you think the politicians are not being honest in the fact that they're not giving the public a reality check? But
I do. And I remember Lady T once saying that when the noise between the two front benches was loudest, it was usually because the point of disagreement was at its least. And when we talk about £20 billion black holes within the context of the overall scale of public borrowing, 100 billion a year, what was it, 14 billion last month alone?
Yes, exactly.
That we borrowed?
Well, and the fact is that we are spending more on debt interest than we're spending on defence, education, and the home, and the protection of our borders, all wrapped up into one. Warning there from Sir Mark that Britain's heading potentially to another IMF-style bailout. Do you think it's that bad?
I don't think the IMF have enough money to do it this time.
Who's going to bail out the bailouters?
I think I think we're going to need a recalibration of our public finances. Look at the stock market. All the indications are that the companies are severely overpriced, both here and in the United States. There will probably be at some point soon a correction. That correction could be severe, and that will require, whatever governments are telling us currently, that will require really significant changes to our approach to tax and spend in this country. And we need to stop pretending to the public that you can have more and more state without penal levels of taxation.
Do you wish you had said that to them? Given, without being putting too fine a point on this, and I'm trying not to be rude, and this comes from a position of respect. Given you lost your seat in the last election, do you think perhaps the Tories could have been more honest on the way out than they were? And actually, that election result was almost kind of inevitable after 14 years, as Sir Mark was talking about the secular process of British politics. Do you wish you'd said all this when you were in power?
I did say a lot of it privately. I said some of it publicly. Now, you know the old joke about the best way to keep a secret was to say it in the House of Commons.
Yes.
I actually said in the speech I gave when Margaret died that I would welcome the battle of ideas returning to domestic politics. We didn't confront the public with the truth. And members of Parliament, on the Conservative side as well, seem to regard the badge of success of how much of the public's own money they could take from them in tax, funnel through the state machine, and give back to them in various benefits and grants and community funds and the rest of it, rather than remembering the fundamental tenet that Mrs. Thatcher used to speak about, that the public, people know better how to spend their own money than ministers, civil servants and the state will ever do, that the fundamental job of government is to create the right framework of law for enterprise, freedom under a rule of law very different than ruled by lawyers. And we lost all that, and we were rightly punished. And this lot that we've got now, I mean, they're even worse than we imagined, but they only had to be not conservatives to win the last election. I can't recall a time when a party was less challenged on what it would do in government, and we're seeing the inevitable consequence of that play out.
The inevitable consequences of that is the Tory party still struggling to regain credibility, and Nigel Farage surging ahead to 35%, in the polls. I think nothing sums up more quite how lily-livered this country has become by this current political storm that should be engulfing, but isn't quite yet engulfing Downing Street, about collapsing a trial of two men accused of spying for China to not upset the Chinese and not upset Chinese trade interests. I can't imagine Margaret Thatcher having much truck with that.
None at all. None at all. And I think, we talk about how Mrs. Thatcher started with first principles. She wouldn't be talking about the planning permission. She wanted to know what the hell it was the Chinese needed this deep basement for in their embassy. Right? She'd have wanted to know what it was all about, and she'd have simply said no. And there is something about this that doesn't smell right. And I remember, Harry, I became a meme over a piece of cake. A piece of cake.
Yes, indeed.
Do you remember?
You were ambushed by the cake.
Boris was ambushed by the cake, but apparently there was no cake.
Yeah. Well,
but do you remember everyone in full pursuit over whether there was cake in a Tupperware box in the cabinet room?
We're having more arguments about that.
And here we are. An enemy state. And let's be clear, it's not just an economic competitor. It is a state that wishes our values in the West harm. And there is a trial of two people who seem to be allegedly agents in some way of that regime, spying. And the trial's collapsed. And it seems to go all the way to Downing Street. I know you over a long period of time. Sadly, you're now in the States, but I'm sure that your spirit in newsrooms across the country will be pursuing that.
I hope so.
I think it will
definitely
come to a very, very unpleasant end for the current government.
Are we in hock to the Chinese? Can we ever get out? Isn't that talking about levelling with voters and politicians being straight with the public? Haven't they just got to say, you know what? This is the mess we've got ourselves into, and if you want all those cheap imports and solar panels and electric car batteries and Lord knows what else you can buy on Temu, then this is a reality of it. This is how we have to play the game.
You've got to be very clear with the public and in terms of the framing of your own policy, particularly on AI. right? Because that is the next thing. If it's the United States or China, and it will be one or other, potentially both, who get the breakthrough there, they will run the global order. And the problem with the Chinese, not the problem, it's very good for them, they don't think in piffling little 4-year election cycles. They're thinking in decades and half centuries.
That's because they are
and even
communist, freedom of
well,
communist dictatorship.
Indeed, and I'm not advocating for, I'm liberated from public office, and unless I run for chairmanship of a golf club someday, I don't intend ever to have my name on a ballot paper again, but I'm still in favour of elections. We are incredibly short-termist in the West, and we have to be honest about what we would need to do. There was a piece in one of the papers in the last couple of days about the robot factories in China and how there's the only people there are the janitors who
and the security
sweep the floors and the security guards. There aren't even lights in these factories. They are marching ahead of us, and unless we get serious about that and understand the consequence of that, try to catch up and try to carve out the regulatory framework, we will find that what's going on with China now, Belt and Road in Africa and elsewhere, our ancestors will look back and wonder how on earth we screwed this up.